They came for our species. We gave them hell. The Nigean fleet emerged from hyperspace with no warning. 1 second, the endless black of space surrounded the Valiant. The next, thousands of warships blinked into existence, disgorging swarms of attack craft that immediately opened fire. Theros had come for Earth. Alarms blared on the bridge. The deck shook as a barrage of missiles slammed into their hull. "Damage report!" yelled Captain Alvarez. Crew frantically scrambled to their stations. Carl, at the weapons console, desperately returned fire. The Valiant's railguns flashed, spitting streams of depleted uranium at the encroaching horde. A Nigean frigate exploded, then another. But it was like shooting a charging elephant with a pea shooter. An energy beam lanced out and carved a molten gash along the Valiant's flank. Atmosphere vented from the breached compartments, taking a dozen crew with it. "Shields down to 20%. We can't take another hit like that." "Lay in a course for Earth. Maximum burn. We have to warn them." The Valiant's engines flared white-hot as she fled, the pursuing Nigeans close behind. They'd barely escaped destruction, but the worst was yet to come. The Nigeans swept over Earth's defenses like a plague of locusts. Enormous ships rained plasma bolts and antimatter bombs with merciless precision, obliterating cities and reducing military bases to rubble. Theros broadcast his demands on all frequencies. Humanity would submit to eternal enslavement, or be annihilated down to the last mewling child. Aboard the limping Valiant, Carl received word that LA had been among the first targets destroyed. His heart seized as he looked at a flickering pic of his wife and son, now nothing more than radioactive ash. As reports flooded in of millions dead and Earth's forces in disarray, Carl's shock hardened into a core of icy rage. He had a new mission now, to make the Nigeans pay, to visit upon them a vengeance so terrible that it would echo through the cosmos until the end of time. The scattered survivors of humanity's fleet regrouped around the ravaged Earth. A few dozen battered warships facing a ruthless armada that blackened the skies. They all knew in their bones that the Nigeans would not stop until humans were either extinct or broken. There would be no negotiation, no quarter, no mercy. Humanity's only choices were victory or death, and against those odds, Carl began to plan his revenge. Carl gathered the ragged remnants of Earth's defenders aboard the Valiant. In the dimly lit briefing room, he laid out his audacious plan. "We've got one shot at this," he said, his voice edged with steel. "We're going to take the fight right to Theros himself." Sergeant Jack Reese, Carl's closest friend and a demolitions wizard, chimed in. "I like the way you think, boss. Let's shove some fireworks up their scaly asses." The assembled soldiers chuckled grimly. Using a captured Nigean scout ship, Carl, Jack, and a hand-picked squad of hardened veterans slipped through the enemy blockade. The small craft glided unnoticed into the cavernous hangar bay of Theros's dreadnought. As klaxons began to blare, the infiltration team moved out, snaking through the labyrinthine corridors of the alien ship. Jack and his demo experts peeled off, planting high-yield charges at critical junctures. The sounds of distant explosions and weapons fire reverberated through the hull as the diversionary attack commenced. Carl and his strike force battled their way to the command bridge, cutting down Nigean warriors with precise bursts of gunfire. They breached the massive doors to find Theros himself waiting, flanked by his most elite guards. A vicious firefight erupted, energy beams and bullets crisscrossing the room. Jack caught a plasma bolt in the chest and went down screaming. Carl dove behind a control console, popping up to snap off shots. One by one, the Nigean guards fell until only Theros remained standing. The warlord lunged at Carl with a roar, swinging a crackling energy glaive. Carl sidestepped the blow and rammed his rifle butt into Theros's face. The two titans grappled in hand-to-hand combat, smashing through control consoles in a whirlwind of shattered metal and sparks. With a primal howl, Carl unsheathed his combat knife and rammed it to the hilt into Theros's neck. The warlord convulsed and fell still, black ichor pooling around his corpse. Carl staggered to his feet as the ship quaked around him, the demo charges starting a chain reaction. He hauled Jack up, blood leaking from his friend's mouth. Together, they hobbled to the nearest escape pod and piled in. The pod jettisoned with a burst of acceleration moments before the dreadnought exploded in a mini supernova. Carl watched through the view screen as expanding clouds of debris swallowed nearby Nigean ships. Aboard the Retribution, Admiral Petrov saw the dreadnought dissolve into a raging inferno. "All ships! Attack!" he barked. The battered human fleet surged forward as one, pouring volleys of missiles and mass driver rounds into the disarrayed Nigian ranks. Alien hulls buckled and shattered under the onslaught, their formation fractured. Yet the Nigeans still outnumbered the human ships 20-1. Their remaining vessels quickly regrouped, energy weapons already glowing as they prepared to return fire. In the aftermath of the daring raid, Earth's forces had struck a heavy blow, but the war was a long way to go. Promoted for his decisive actions, newly minted Colonel Carl struggled to chart a path to victory against the still overwhelming odds. As reports flooded in of hard-fought battles across the solar system, each carrying a horrific toll, he pored over intelligence reports and sensor logs, desperate to find some chink in the Nigeans' armor, a flaw that could be exploited to finally end the invasion before humanity was ground down to bloody stumps. The survival of the human race hung by a fraying thread, and that thread lay in Carl's battle-scarred hands. Colonel Carl Grant stood on the bridge of the captured Nigean stealth fighter, his eyes fixed on the asteroid belt ahead. The vast field of rocky debris stretched as far as the eye could see, hiding within it a prize that could turn the tide of the war. "Target acquired," his pilot announced. "Nigean resupply depot dead ahead." Carl nodded grimly. "All units, prepare to engage. Remember, we hit hard and fast, no survivors." The squadron of stolen alien craft slipped silently through the asteroid field, their stealth systems rendering them invisible to Nigean scanners. As they closed in on the massive depot, Carl could see the sprawling complex of storage facilities, shipyards, and defense platforms. "Weapons hot," Carl ordered. "Fire at will." A barrage of high-yield missiles streaked from the human-piloted fighters, slamming into fuel depots and ammunition stores. Massive explosions ripped through the Nigean facility, sending debris spinning off into space. Alarms blared as Nigean ships scrambled to respond, but Carl's team was already on to Phase 2 of the operation. "There's our target," Carl said, pointing to an enormous vessel dwarfing the others around it. "The factory ship. Let's introduce ourselves." Their fighters screamed towards the behemoth, dodging streams of plasma fire from its point defense guns. With practiced precision, Carl's team positioned themselves alongside an airlock and blasted it open. "Boarding party, move in." Carl led the charge into the alien vessel, his rifle spitting bursts of armor-piercing rounds. Nigean crew fell before the human onslaught as they fought their way deeper into the ship. "Jack, get those charges set," Carl barked into his comm as they reached the central reactor. "We don't have much time." His demolitions expert went to work while the rest of the team held off waves of Nigean defenders. The sounds of battle drew closer as enemy reinforcements poured in. "Charges are hot!" Jack shouted. "Time to blow this popsicle stand!" They sprinted for the exit, Carl providing covering fire as Nigean troops closed in from all sides. They barely made it back to their fighters and disengaged when the charges detonated. The factory ship's reactor went critical, tearing the massive vessel apart from the inside. Secondary explosions rippled outward, consuming nearby ships and structures in a cataclysmic chain reaction. As Carl's team rocketed away from the expanding debris field, he allowed himself a grim smile. The Nigeans had just lost a vital asset, and humanity had struck its first real blow in this war. But there was no time to celebrate. Their next target awaited them in the rings of Saturn. Admiral Petrov's voice crackled over the comms. "Excellent work, Colonel. Now let's keep the pressure on these bastards. I want that refueling depot taken intact." Carl acknowledged the order and set course for the gas giant. His team would spearhead the assault, clearing the way for Petrov's main fleet to seize the critical fueling facilities. Days later, human warships dropped out of FTL in Saturn's orbit, catching the Nigean defenders flat-footed. Carl's infiltration team had already disabled the depot's early warning systems, leaving the alien forces scrambling to mount a defense. "All ships, engage at will," Petrov's voice boomed across the fleet channel. "Marine teams, prepare for boarding action." Carl led his assault team in on the first wave, their boarding craft weaving through the chaos of ship-to-ship combat. They latched onto one of the main refueling platforms and blasted their way inside. The fighting was brutal in close quarters. Carl's rifle butt caved in a Nigean skull as he fought hand-to-hand down twisting corridors. Blood, both human and alien, slicked the deck plates as the two sides clashed for control of the vital facility. "Engineering is secure," one of Carl's lieutenants reported. "We've got control of primary systems." "Good work," Carl replied, ducking a plasma bolt. "Now let's mop up the rest of these squid heads." It took hours of vicious room-to-room fighting, but eventually the last pockets of Nigean resistance were crushed. Carl stood on the depot's command deck, surveying the aftermath of the battle. The refueling station was theirs, but the cost had been high. "Status report," he barked. "We've taken heavy casualties, sir," his XO replied, "but the facility is largely intact. Fuel reserves are at 89% capacity." Carl nodded grimly. They'd paid in blood for this victory, but now they had the resources for a true counteroffensive. As Petrov's fleet secured their prize, Carl was already planning their next move. The shipyards on Mars would be a tough nut to crack, but if they could pull it off, it might just break the back of the Nigen war machine. He gathered his core team for a briefing. "All right, people, listen up. We've got ourselves a ticket to the Red Planet, and we're going to make it count." Carl stood on the bridge of the captured Nigean stealth fighter, his eyes fixed on the asteroid belt ahead. The vast field of rocky debris stretched as far as the eye could see, hiding within it a prize that could turn the tide of the war. But this time, they weren't after a resupply depot. They were bait. "All units, execute hit-and-run protocols," Carl ordered over the secure comm channel. "Remember, make it look good. We need to draw them out." The human fleet darted in and out of the asteroid field, striking at the edges of the Nigean armada before retreating. Plasma bolts and missile contrails lit up the void as the aliens gave chase, pushing deeper into the belt. On the bridge of the flagship Indomitable, Admiral Petrov watched the tactical display with laser focus. "Status report," he barked. "Nigen forces are fully committed, sir," his XO replied. "They've taken the bait." Petrov allowed himself a thin smile. "Excellent. All ships execute Operation Hammerfall." Deep within the asteroid belt, concealed human warships powered up their engines. Missile frigates, fighter carriers, and boarding craft surged forward from their hiding spots. Carl's voice crackled over the comms. "Special ops teams, you're clear to engage. Hit 'em hard and fast." Swarms of fighters and missiles erupted from the human fleet, catching the overextended Nigean ships completely off guard. Explosions blossomed across alien hull plating as the first salvos found their marks. Carl led the charge, his boarding pod rocketing towards the massive Nigen flagship. The dreadnought's point defense guns opened up, filling space with deadly energy bolts. But the human craft were too numerous and too quick. "Breach teams, go, go, go!" Carl shouted as their pod slammed into the alien hull. Explosive bolts blew the hatch, and Carl's commandos poured into the ship. Zero-G combat erupted in the alien corridors. Carl fired his mag boots, anchoring himself to the deck as he traded fire with Nigean Death Guard troops. The aliens were fearsome warriors, but the humans had the element of surprise. "Push to the bridge," Carl ordered, leading the charge down twisting passageways. They fought tooth and nail for every meter gained, sabotaging systems as they went. Meanwhile, Jack Reese and his demo team infiltrated the massive engine section. They moved quickly, planting high-yield charges at critical junctures. "Charges are hot," Jack reported, "ready to blow this sucker sky high on your command." The ship rocked as Nigen reinforcements mounted a furious counterattack. Carl and his team were pinned down outside the bridge, exchanging fire with waves of alien troops. "Reese, light it up!" Carl shouted into his comm. Jack hit the detonator. A series of thunderous explosions tore through the dreadnought's drive section. The deck heaved beneath their feet as the ship's engines were ripped apart. With the flagship crippled, the tide of battle shifted. Human warships closed in, trapping the Nigean fleet in a deadly crossfire. Petrov's voice boomed over the fleet channel. "All ships, press the attack. Don't let a single one escape." Wave after wave of missiles and fighters pummeled the withdrawing Nigean vessels. Karl fought his way onto the bridge of the captured dreadnought, securing their prize as the last pockets of alien resistance were crushed. Hours later, as the dust settled, Karl stood on the observation deck of the Indomitable. The asteroid belt was littered with the broken husks of Nigean ships. They'd won a decisive victory, but at a cost. Petrov joined him, his face grim. "Well done, Colonel. But this is just the beginning. Their main fleet will be coming, and in far greater numbers." Karl nodded, his eyes fixed on the stars. They'd bought Earth some time, but the real test was yet to come. As teams of engineers and scientists swarmed over the captured dreadnought, searching for weaknesses to exploit, Karl knew the fate of humanity still hung in the balance. Balance. Months crawled by as humanity fortified its defenses, the captured Nigean dreadnought yielding its secrets under intense scrutiny. Colonel Karl Grant pored over reports in a dimly lit lab, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "Anything?" he asked the chief scientist. Dr. Eliza Chen shook her head. "Their technology is incredibly advanced. We've improved our shielding and weapons, but found no silver bullet." Karl's fist clenched. They needed a game-changer and fast. The klaxons blared without warning. Karl sprinted to the command center, his heart pounding. The tactical display showed a sea of red blips materializing at the system's edge. "Mother of God," someone whispered. The Nigean armada dwarfed anything they'd faced before. Thousands of warships, their energy signatures off the charts. At their center loomed a behemoth that made the captured dreadnought look like a child's toy. "All stations, battle stations!" Admiral Petrov's voice crackled over the comms. "This is not a drill. Initiate Operation Sanctuary immediately." Karl watched in horror as the alien fleet accelerated toward Earth. Their intentions were clear: total extermination. "Get me to Mars," Karl barked. "We need to evacuate as many civilians as we can." The next weeks passed in a blur of desperate action. Karl coordinated refugee transports while human squadrons fought delaying actions across the system. He watched from the bridge of his ship as Jupiter's moons fell, then Saturn's rings. Each battle bought precious time, paid for in human lives. On Mars, Karl led teams into sprawling underground complexes. "Move it, people!" he shouted, herding civilians into cramped shelters. "We don't have much time." The ground shook as the first Nigean ships entered orbit. Karl's communicator crackled. "Colonel, they're beginning atmospheric entry." Karl's blood ran cold. "Seal the blast doors. All non-essential personnel to the deepest levels now." He made it to the command bunker just as the bombardment began. The fury of it defied description. The bunker's sensors overloaded, unable to process the sheer destructive power being unleashed. Hours passed. The streams of refugees slowed to a trickle, then stopped entirely. Karl knew what that meant. There was no one left on the surface to save. A deafening crash shook the bunker. Alarms blared as bulkheads buckled. "Sir, they've breached the outer defenses," a lieutenant reported. "We can't hold them off much longer." Karl looked at the handful of soldiers around him, then at the terrified civilians huddled in the corridors beyond. He made his decision. "Get those evac shuttles loaded and launch immediately," he ordered. "I'll buy you some time." "But sir..." "That's an order, soldier. Move." As the last refugees were herded onto the shuttles, Karl gathered a group of volunteers. They took up defensive positions, checking weapons and saying quick prayers. Karl activated the facility's broadcast system one last time. "To all of humanity," he began, his voice steady. "We face extinction, but we are not finished. Remember who we are. Remember what we've endured. Never surrender. Never stop fighting. The human spirit cannot be extinguished." The sounds of battle grew closer. Carl hefted his rifle and nodded to his comrades. Let's give these bastards a proper welcome. The bunker doors blew inward in a shower of debris, and alien troops poured through. Carl and his team opened fire, their weapons blazing in the confined space. They fought with desperate fury, buying precious seconds for the escaping shuttles with every alien they cut down. One by one, Carl's companions fell. He kept fighting, his rifle empty, using it as a club as he was overwhelmed by sheer numbers. His last thought before darkness took him was of Earth, and the hope that some fragment of humanity might yet survive. In orbit, Admiral Petrov watched in anguish as Mars burned. The Nigean fleet pressed on relentlessly toward Earth. He knew they couldn't stop them, but perhaps they could slow them down. All ships, he commanded, prepare to execute Protocol Omega. Across the system, human captains received the orders with grim understanding. In moments, antimatter warheads detonated in the heart of population centers. The explosions were beyond apocalyptic, vaporizing everything for hundreds of miles. Billions perished in atomic fire. But still the Nigeans came on. The final battle for Earth unfolded with terrible inevitability. Petrov's battered fleet threw everything they had at the invaders, fighting with suicidal desperation. For a moment, it seemed they might.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.